So I'd like to welcome everyone. My name is Dr. Ron Berman. I'm an Associate Dean of the College of Doctoral Studies and Chair of the Doctorate in Business Administration program. Today, I'm delighted to introduce to you Dr. Terila Johnson, and she still can't get over that, but it is my pleasure. And she will share with you her dissertation, but more importantly, who she is and lessons learned along the way. Dr. Johnson.
Thank you. So first and foremost, thank you all for coming. I echo Dr. Berman's sentiments. It's really nice to see our community here come together and you all being here. And I did see somebody from Michigan, and I'm a Michigander, so yay. Glad to see that there. My name is Dr. Terila Johnson, so I'll just go ahead and get started here with the presentation. That way we have enough time for you guys to ask questions if you should need to do so. So my doctorate is actually, I'm one of the DBA graduates, so I graduated with the Doctor of Business Administration. My emphasis was management, and my dissertation was design thinking as an innovative approach to assist dissertation chairs. So a little bit about me. I am a Christian. I'm a wife. I have two young adults and one almost young adult coming up here in the next month or so. Mother, doctoral education professional. I have been in this particular area for a little over 6 years now, and I'm an educator. Some of my areas of interest, as you see here, is business management, design thinking, training and development, leadership. And then something I've recently started to get involved in within the last year is user experience design. Really enjoying that. A little bit of a nerd when it comes to that as of right now. Some of my hobbies are painting, photography, and video. I love to read. I'm actually an avid reader. Writing, I like to color. Still as a little kid, I still have coloring books and crayons and markers and colored pencils and the whole nine. I love to sketch. I like taking really long walks. Studying the Bible is actually a hobby of mine, ministering to other people, and then spending time with my family. Of course, that's a little bit about me. Um, why did I decide to get my doctorate? Interesting, Dr. Berman asked me this question last week, and he had to pull on me just a little bit more. But although you see it in the center, it actually was my number one. The primary reason that I decided I wanted to get a doctorate is because I wanted to become a researcher. And this was the best path to be able to do so. The second reason that I was able to kind of reflect on a little bit was also to advance my knowledge and my expertise. I really wanted to become more knowledgeable in some areas and actually expand my expertise. And then finally, to be able to expand my opportunities. So I was already doing some things, but getting my doctorate actually opened me up to be able to put me in position to be able to do some other things. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go along here. So I have a very unique path, but not so unique. I think all of us experience this as a doctoral learner when we're in the throes of taking our classes and things like that. And we have an idea about what we think we want to do research on. So this is how I got here. I know it seems really interesting that it's not a story, or I'm not going to talk about I was passionate about it when I first got started, because it was actually a little bit opposite for me. I had 4 dissertation topics that I came up with when I was in my content courses, and none of them were going to work. Primarily because I had this habit of wanting to focus more on the people group rather than anything else, and not looking at all the other components of research. And out of those 4 topics, I actually wrote 2 literature reviews. And that was a little traumatic for about 24 hours until I realized, wait a minute, I can actually write a literature review, and I can actually take research, put it together, and I can actually come up with an idea for research. So my story, if you see here on this particular slide, kind of starts down at the bottom of this slide. I was transitioning roles. I had just written a paper in one of my content courses, happened to be having a conversation with one of my leaders about a problem that we were having in our current work. And I said, you know, I just wrote a paper on that. I'd love to be able to, you know, give it to you so you can see it, to see if there's something there that we can actually use. She read the paper. She reached back out to me in about 48 hours and she said, how much do you know about this design thinking thing? And I said, not too much. I just happened to use it in the paper. She said, I really think you need to take some more time to go back and look at that a little bit more. I think you got a topic here. So that's what I did. Went to Google Scholar. I pulled up about 50 to 60 articles on design thinking, and I went back and reread Ulibarri et al. To get an understanding of what they did. And I was like, wow, this is it. And taking some time kind of reflecting over the 4 topics that I had prior to that, I noticed that I resonated a lot with problem solving theories. So that's kind of how it worked out. Long and short story, Ulibarri et al. Had done a longitudinal study over the course of 3 years where they had done design thinking workshops at Stanford University. And their overall goal was to see if design thinking can actually be used to help doctoral students overcome problems that they were facing in their dissertation. That's actually what I do in my profession, so it lined up pretty well. Went on and I did some more reading. Cravens et al. Was the next one because what I needed to see was, okay, we have this one study for design thinking in doctoral education, but has it ever been studied again or before that? Only found one other study, which was Cravens et al., but they did things a little bit different. It was still the same group of researchers. Instead, what they were looking at it was from the dissertation chair side. They wanted to look at them as researchers and they wanted to see how do they approach coaching their students. So there was the second one. So at that time, I was able to put a literature review together again, another set of 10 strategic points and the perspectives, and it kind of just went from there. And so over time, I would say probably a year after coming into dissertation and writing up a proposal, where you see Maul, Berman, and Ames, that was a conversation that emerged between me and my chair about feeling like something was missing in my study. She just mentioned, do you know anything about research self-efficacy? I said, nope. And I went and did some reading, and it was the point that connected the dots. And then finally, just to make sure that contextually, this was necessary research in doctoral education, I went and I read 50 to 60 more studies on doctoral education just to see if there were some things in the literature that need to be studied. And so you see that 4th one there in the top bullet point. And so if you notice here in this one, pretty much what I did is I just demonstrate how I use multiple articles to formulate a need. Currently at GCU now, we're moving more into this problem space, but that is how I came up with my problem space. So that is how I came up with my study. I went from a place of me trying to decide in advance what my study should be about, and I let the literature actually inform me. So that's actually my true story there. So here you see this is my purpose and problem stated. I did a qualitative case study, single and explanatory. Reason being because there was not a lot of information out there about design thinking in doctoral education, particularly when it came down to the process of chairs coaching students. And so that was actually my actual phenomena. So here you see my purpose and my problem statement. Don't need to spend too much time there because we all know about purpose statements and problem statements. So as I kind of alluded to before, I had 3 theoretical foundations, the first one being design thinking. So what is design thinking? It pretty much is a problem solving approach. Now, there are multiple models out there for design thinking, but the Hassel-Plattner Institute of Design over at Stanford, they were actually the best one to fit my study. And in this one, they have this 5-stage model. So you see this here. First stage, to empathize. So that's really to come in, get an understanding of what's going on, the people involved, and gather information about what needs to be done in that context to solve a problem. It also involves a lot when it comes to creativity. And then the second, the define stage. So that's when you actually nail down what the problem actually is, or if there are other problems associated with it. And then that's when you go there. And then ideate. That's when you start to come up with ideas for solutions on how you're going to solve this problem. And then prototyping, that's when you actually come up with physical rough drafts of the actual solution, and then that final phase in testing it. Now, I know you see here, it's like going bullet point down, but the thing about design thinking is it's actually very iterative, just like the dissertation process. So one of the things that I observed in my foundational courses before I got to my dissertation was that in my understanding of design thinking, it actually looked very much like what we get here at GCU. There's design thinking in the templates. They're actually designed a certain way to give us the thinking about what we're supposed to do to actually come up with a good research plan. The chairs actually use it to get us from point A to point B. And we as students actually use it to field our way through the complexity of research. So that was my first theoretical foundation. And for my particular study, I really wanted to know how they use it. All
Okay, I
right.
have there's a question in the chat.
Mhm.
How is this design thinking different than other ways of developing a product or an idea? How is
Good
it
point.
different?
Good question. So it is different in ways, but very similar in other ways. So this is the Hassel-Plattner one. Hassel-Plattner, this particular model of design thinking can be used for product development or idea development. But LECA over at the University of Virginia, that's more new product development. So that's where it makes it a little bit distinct, but you can actually use it in both spaces. So that was actually a really, really good question. All right. So
Okay.
then coming
Also,
down,
I think if you go back one of the differences which you and I have talked about
uh-huh.
is the idea of prototyping. And in traditional design thinking, it was we're going to develop something and we assume we're right and it's not going to change. Here, we assume we may not be right and it probably will change. And that's a fundamental difference.
Yeah, and that's the thing about design thinking is that it puts you as the designer and the people that you're designing something for the opportunity to really embrace those changes and use them. So it removes that apprehension of things are going to change, and it puts you in a position where you can actually use those changes, whether good or bad, to your benefit.
Okay.
So
Here's
design.
another question that came in. You mentioned that you utilize 3 theoretical foundations. Is it common to use multiple? Is it preferred to use multiple?
All right, very good question as well. So it would depend on your study. Um, so there's a lot of times students ask, should we do it one way or this way? But the dissertation process is very unique. So it would depend on your study. Does it fit better to have multiple theories, or is it better to just have one? And in my case, it fit better to have more than one. Mainly because I wanted to know how design thinking could be used by the dissertation chairs. I was also looking at the coaching process. So you need a theory to be able to pin that down. And then the overall outcome of actually doing a dissertation, which is becoming a novice researcher. So do you have that competence and the confidence to actually get through the steps of getting it done? So it worked out well for 3.
All right, we have another question. This looks like the engineering design process, is it?
It is very much used in engineering. Yes.
Okay. Also, there's another comment. This seems a little bit like agile development, is it?
It's very much like agile as well. Yep, all things that are used actually in the design thinking world. Yep,
Okay, thank you.
you're very, very welcome. All right, so let's move forward. Second one, research self-efficacy. So we all know about Bandura's theory of self-efficacy. This is just a extant theory beyond that one going into research. So it is the individual's belief in their ability to complete research tasks, to conduct research. And so this is the 4 factors of that. This is a description. This goes all the way back to 1996. There is a ton of literature out there on research self-efficacy, but most of it is quantitative, okay? So in doing reading on research self-efficacy, we actually noted that there was a need to get a better understanding of how research self-efficacy is actually developed. But there wasn't a lot out there because it hasn't been studied qualitatively, which gave me some more support and justification for a qualitative case study. Just to kind of stick here just a little bit, some of the things that really got discussed a lot in collecting my data and analyzing it, we had a lot of discussion, the participants and I, about research knowledge, research skills, research tasks. What's the difference between those things and how do those things come together? And so it was really unique to be able to learn about that. And that's some of the things that kind of evolved in this whole how of research self-efficacy actually evolves. And so my study actually lended very well to providing additional knowledge on that one. Finally, the theoretical foundation for coaching. So Very true story with this one. This one came um, about 48 hours before I was getting ready to go to level 2 peer review. And I was at residency 3, and I realized that I didn't have a theory to really pin down the coaching. And so had a conversation with my chair. Again, this is, the study really evolving over time. And that's what design thinking, honestly, from a personal level, actually helped me do. When changes would come and things would happen, I wasn't as apprehensive. I was more of finding a way of how to make this fit in. And so after looking at several models, we determined that Hersey and Blanchard's model was actually the best, mainly because Hersey and Blanchard models gives you a chance to really look at development levels. And so you'll see that 4 levels of development there. And so that's why that particular model was chosen. Now, when we look at it from an alignment standpoint, when your chair is coaching you and that process of coaching you, let's just be honest, we've never done a dissertation before. It's new for us. We've never gotten a doctorate. And so part of the chair's job is to help us develop an independent scholarship. And so that was a good reason why it fit. All right, so as you see here, these are my research questions. I had one overarching research question. Again, how do dissertation chairs use design thinking to coach dissertation students to develop their research self-efficacy, and then the 4 research questions. So in designing these 4 research questions, we decided that it was really good for us to be able to drill down and really get data that would be rich and that would give us that information that is really needed, because that's one of the things with choosing a case study. When you have a ill-defined problem or something that just doesn't seem well put together or messy, you can bound it. But case studies are really good when you need a lot more information. And so my chair and I would sat down and we worked through the research questions so that we can really get that. So the first thing we wanted to know is design thinking valuable? Does it have any value for a dissertation chair or a dissertation student? That was the first thing that we wanted to know. And then secondly, we wanted to know about those stages or steps in design thinking, like drilling down into them. How is empathy used? How is defining used? How is ideation used? How is prototyping used? How is testing used, if it's even used at all? All right. And then how do you use design thinking to develop research self-efficacy? And if so, how is that happening? And then finally, how does the use of chair coaching based on design thinking enable students to develop their dissertation? So again, this was things that we did not know. And so we designed these research questions so that we can get some data about that. And so it was really fun. And I'll talk about some of the challenges with that in a little bit. So as I just mentioned, I did a qualitative methodology. My research design was actually a single case study. I could have done multiple. That would have made it harder, take a little bit longer. So multiple, single, they both work. What makes it easy? What helps me get done quicker? It was a single. So that was really the reason why I could have gone in either direction. And so you see here, that's the methodology and design. So my sample was dissertation chairs at one university on the southwest side of the United States, and then also students who had graduated. So that was my sample. I had 3 sources of data. First source of data was interviews with the dissertation chairs. Second source of data was interviews with the students. My third source of data was focus groups. The reason I chose these different sources of data was, 1, I wanted to be able to get sources of data that would really help me triangulate. And then also 2, I wanted to make sure that in getting those perspectives in the data, I didn't have just one perspective. So you get one perspective when you interview the chairs, you get a different perspective when you interview the students, but when you put people in focus groups, different things happen because people are interacting. Dr. Berman, did you have a question for me?
Yes. This seems like this was a great qualitative study. Was this the very first qualitative study you ever performed?
Ever, 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 ever. And it was hard. I'm just going to be honest about it. Even coming up with the sources of data, I got stuck and decided I wasn't going to write for 3 or 4 weeks because I disagreed with everybody, chair and everybody who knew qualitative research that I shouldn't do interviews with the students. I didn't want to know about the students. I wanted to know about the chairs, and that didn't make sense. So 3 weeks of not writing and really taking some time for 3 or 4 weeks after that to understand triangulation a little better and understand why that was the best approach for my study. So
Thank you.
Yep, very first time doing it. All right. So then data collection. So this particular slide is just what we are expected to do at GCU. You know, first and foremost, we have to work through developing an interview protocol and a guide. It is really good, and it really, really does support the quality of your actual study. When you have an expert panel, review that interview protocol just to see if the interview, just to get some feedback on whether the interview questions are actually going to help you answer the research questions. You got to get site approval. If you're going to collect data at anyone's physical site, you need to get that permission to actually do that. And then I had to get approval from my committee, and then IRB, right? And then formal consent from each participant. Are you willing to participate in this, and making sure that they understand this is what's going to happen in this study, interviews, focus groups. And then finally, the other piece that was really, really important, because design thinking is new, I needed to make sure my participants understood what design thinking was before they could actually do the interview. Dr. Berman?
Another question just came in. Relevant to your study, how did you minimize bias?
All right, very, very good question, which we're going to talk about in thematic analysis, because I noticed someone asked that question earlier, in hand coding. So if you give me a little bit, we'll get down there and I will actually address that.
All right, thank you.
All right, so here we are. I actually use a service called Timmy, and this is what I use to transcribe them. And then in the checking of the transcription. So you never want to just trust a service or somebody else to do that. You want to make sure that those transcripts are correct. But it lended very well because Timmy actually has it where it plays it out loud as it's going. So I was able to go through Clark and Braun's 6 steps fairly easy. But this is where bias really, really starts to get managed. So the first step, you listen. You're actually going to sit down. You're going to listen, just listening to your actual interviews and focus groups. And then you're going to listen and read. That's when you listen to them, and then you have the transcript up there, and then you reread again. And that's when you move through coding. So the coding data for me, I had a pre-coding process, and pretty much what this looks like, it looked like for me, was that I opened up a Word document and I used embedded comments going through the first transcript just with research question 1. Then I moved to transcript 2. What I did was in transcript 1, I came up with codes that I thought there. And then when transcript 2 came, I'm analyzing transcript 2 to see if anything new emerges, or if something came out in transcript 2 that I think the first participant said, and are they saying the same thing, and adjusting those codes and editing them. All right. So coding for me was hard. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my entire life. It was the hardest part of the process for me, to be perfectly honest. And it was the part that I needed my chair for the most. In managing my bias, when I did my first few transcripts, I let her see them. And she let me know, this is you. This is not what the participant is saying. This is you. And so she really had to work with me and really, really coach me on really being able to look at the essence of their perspectives. So I actually had to edit and revise my codes 4 times before I actually got it right. And then I had to go back and I had to do some more reading, because again, that was the point where I'm like, I don't think I really understand what I'm supposed to be doing. And I got it right eventually. This is my first time coding. If you're doing qualitative work, it's going to be your first time coding. You're not expected to be perfect, but you need to really make sure that your codes actually capture what your participants are saying. So coding was difficult for me. All right. And then combining the codes. And then combining those codes, that's when you start working through what coming up with those actual themes were. And then identifying patterns and then putting them all together. So this is where my focus groups came in handy. I had a semi-structured focus group. After it was all said and done, I had done my codings and I put codes and put my themes together. My focus groups, what I did with them is I said, okay, here are the themes that came out. I also did member checking before that. So they all got a chance to member check the transcripts after I coded it. And we did the focus groups. And so the things were there and they did a vote. Do you agree? Do you disagree? And then they provided some sort of example or rationale for why or not. And in that focus group, new things come out. I get more description, but it also gives my participants a chance to really say, okay, yeah, but you might want to look at this, that, and the other. So that helped me really manage my bias. That was the first level of first two levels of managing bias. And then finally, in terms of managing bias, I think there's another side of that coin. You are managing researcher bias, but you're also learning reflexivity. And I remember reading quite a bit about reflexivity, but you can't really understand reflexivity until you actually experience it. And so what I had to do to manage it, there were times where I'd be sitting there for hours coding and analyzing data. And at the point where that's what they're saying, rather than becoming objective about what I'm seeing and what I'm reading and what I'm hearing and letting it really speak to me, that's when I knew bias was taking over. In that particular sense, I might get up. There were times where I had to actually stop coding and analyzing the data for 2 to 3 days to give myself a chance to rest. But I was really making sure that I did that. At GCU, we also have a lot of peer review that happens. It happens in your committee. It happens with peer reviewers. So there's a lot of checks and balances and accountability that really, really help you with that. And so that was some ways that I really worked on managing my bias. So hand coding. I did not use Max QDA. My colleagues will tell you I tried. It was like Chinese for me, just being honest about it. It was too much. And I can use it now that I've graduated. Maybe it was just the stress of being in the throes of it, but I couldn't use it. And my chair challenged me and said, I want you to hand code. It was the best decision that I could have ever made because I knew my data. I knew it inside out. I was extremely familiar with it, and it helped tons in terms of going back to my chapter 2 and looking at what previous literature actually said. And when it came down to talking about those results and those findings and the implications, it worked out really, really well with that. And so I hand coded. Kind of gave some steps to what I did. Again, Word document, I used embedded comments. When that was done, I started transferring them over into my code book, and we had a whole process with that. If you are really looking at want to see how I actually did that and what that looks like, go to ProQuest. My dissertation is actually there, and it's actually in the appendix. So I won't spend too much time of that there. So what were the results? Because that's kind of what we want to come out with at the end there. Well, one of the results was design thinking and dissertation chair coaching. Excuse me, let me slow down. Enables the ability to develop tolerance of uncertainty, failure, ambiguity, and risk as normal when you're doing research. It came out on both sides. Both the chairs and the graduates talked about all these things that we needed to have an ability, and it actually helped develop with that. Design thinking and dissertation chair coaching, it actually enabled that to be able to tolerate uncertainty. That's actually one of the mindsets of design thinking. So it was interesting for it to come out on the research side. Embracing failure. Like, we need to be able, we're going to fail. We're not going to always get it right. There are some moments in the process where things can get a little ambiguous. And then risk. It is a risk to write something up, send it back to somebody for them to look at it, and then them to come back and analyze it and give you a critique on it and say where it can be corrected, where you did well, and things like that. Design thinking can be used as a source of support and collaboration in the coaching process, and can contribute to the development of dissertation student research self-efficacy. So what was interesting with talking to the participants, when we started looking at the steps or the stages in design thinking, one thing stood out. Empathy was absolutely necessary. Empathizing with the students to understand them. So that's understanding the people, but then understanding what the problems really, really are and how do you work towards solving them. And so that was another thing. Once you get that understanding, you can start defining things. Chairs even had to test different approaches to coaching their students. There were different things that came out. And so that did emerge that design thinking can help in that aspect. Design thinking can be used to coach to transfer research knowledge and skills. So that's one of the benefits of us having our committee members. They have a little more knowledge than us. When they coach us and they teach us and they help us get through, they're transferring their knowledge and their skills to us. And so design thinking helps in that. And then finally, a multidisciplinary team comprising of a dissertation student and 3 doctoral research faculty can use design thinking in terms of the skills used to applying design thinking knowledge. So again, skills coming with being able to use empathy and different ways of doing that and different ways of defining and things like that. And so those were some of the results that came out. So that's my study. So lessons learned. I learned a lot of lessons, but these 3 were probably the most valuable. One, I learned to use the rubric criteria to design logical paragraphs and sections. So again, I use design thinking in even putting together my paragraphs, and I'll talk about that and show you a little bit more there. And those paragraphs were really tailored around making sure that I specifically address the rubric criteria. So much so that when my chair and I will be going back and forth about something, I knew which paragraph I had wrote and which rubric criteria I was trying to address. And I could tell her that. We'd be in Zoom and I could say, I was trying to do this, this, and this. And she was able to help me say, okay, this is how you can make that better. And also in written feedback. The second thing that I learned was developing the doctoral disposition of being receptive to the feedback, analysis, and constructive critique from peers and faculty within the College of Doctoral Studies community. So this is actually one of our doctoral dispositions. All of us as learners, we have the doctoral dispositions that we're expected to have. And that's really more so about your attitude towards things. Being in my role and being in the process, one thing that I knew to be real is that dissertation makes you emotional. It just is what it is. I couldn't even tell you how many times I literally closed my laptop computer top really hard, and my husband had to say, if you do that again, you're going to break it and you're not getting another one. And in that, I had to learn that nobody is doing anything to personally attack me. They're trying to help me become that scholar that I need to be. And so when I got the feedback, I looked at it as my chair, my methodologist, my content expert, peer reviewers, IRB, everybody involved when I was going to residency and declaring that I was going to do workshops and that was never going to work, right? They're critiquing me, but they're also doing an analysis of my work. And then finally navigating the dissertation experience and the interpersonal dynamics between myself and the committee peer review so that I can start demonstrating collegiality. This is extremely, extremely important. And it's actually one of the things that actually changed me quite a bit. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So there are multiple ways you can write a logical paragraph. But in year 2, before going to dissertation, I discovered a resource that was talking about synthesis, because that's what we're supposed to do. And in that resource, they provided a model of a 7-sentence paragraph that you can use to put together a well-synthesized paragraph, and I started using it in my content courses. So what I would do in my content courses is I would take the expectations for that assignment, I create an outline out of it, and then in that, I move that 7-sentence paragraph and structure in there. And that's how I start working on my logical flow and writing like a scholar while I was in my process. So my chair and many others start with the topic sentence. I don't think well that way. I'm a detail-oriented leader. I see the middle of things first. So it was easier for me to write the middles of my paragraphs first, get an idea of it, make sure that what I wrote is actually addressing the rubric criteria, and then I could start structuring around here. So if you see there, some design thinking in that. It was also easier because as students, we use prior research. We use previous research articles to actually develop our study. So my community before me, which is those scholars that came before me that wrote those articles, they're giving me information, they're communicating with me, I'm using what they have. Now I'm going to say, this is the justification and support for why I'm doing what I'm doing. And now I can start making it relevant to mine. So if you see here, this was my way of doing it. I would review a section of the template. I'd identify the rubric criteria that needs to be addressed. I developed an outline. Literally every chapter was developed this way, an outline. And I would work on the centers to make sure I have what I got there. I learned from myself that I could probably get 3 to 4 center paragraphs done. Then I have to step away from it 24 to 48 hours, come back, look at it again and say, does this really address the rubric criteria to the best of my ability? Draft those topic sentences and then the transition sentences. And that was my process. So that was one of my lessons learned. This was another lesson that I learned. So in 2017, a colleague and I had an opportunity to go present at an academic conference. And it was one of the best experiences that we had, mainly because this conference was on doctoral education and it had global presence. So there were individuals from the United States and over in Europe there. And in putting together that proposal, these 2 articles were what we used to put in there. And one of them was on feedback, and it was the Kumar and Stack 2007. So what they did is they did a study on the linguistics of written feedback. So if a chair or anybody who's mentoring a student in doing a dissertation, how do they give feedback? And they did it qualitatively. If you see here on the left side, these are the 3 major things that stood out. So there's referential feedback, there's directive feedback, and then there's expressive feedback. And then they had these sub things, and then they gave examples of what comments would actually look like. And I kept this particular table near me at all times. So when I got emotional because I didn't understand what my chair was trying to say, maybe I didn't quite agree with what she was trying to say, whatever the case may be, this helped me analyze myself. So in our rubric criteria, as students, we have to score ourselves. So going all the way back to previous leadership that used to be here at GCU when I first came in, I asked one person, well, if you had one thing that you could say to me that would really, really help me get through this, what would it be? And he said, don't become a legend in your own mind. This was one way that I worked on doing that. So what it also did too was it gave me a more logical way of looking at the feedback that I was actually getting. And then I could decide on how I was going to have a collegial conversation with my committee, and more often than not, my chair and my content expert, and we could talk about that feedback. And in that, what it did is it put the emotion down, it let a lot of the defensiveness down, and it gave them an ease of being able to coach me. And it also helped me to be able to take really tough feedback. And so this is one of the lessons that I learned. I really learned how to embrace this particular disposition. And then finally here, so in my professional role, I deal with a lot of problems that happens in the dissertation phase, and I face some on my own. So first and foremost, this first bullet point, our interactions between our committee members and us, we need to start striving to work on a peer-to-peer relationship. It doesn't start that way, but it can be developed. And that's really what I wanted with my committee, was to become at a point where they could talk to me like they would want to talk to me, giving me their knowledge, giving me their skills, giving me their experience, and helping me become that researcher that I wanted to be. The second one was demonstrating the ability to become an independent and self-confident learner, okay? This helped me become an active learner in my experiences. I didn't want my chair holding my hand. I didn't want her to feel like she had to hold my hand. It was important to me because becoming a researcher, a lot of people are not going to be holding your hand through that. It was important to me that I established independence, but not independence that wouldn't get me through. I needed to be effective and efficient in it. And so it was really important to me that I demonstrated my ability to her. And one of the reasons that I really wanted to do that is I wanted her to be able to trust me. So when she sent me off to go do something, I wanted her to know that when I came back with it, it was going to be something that we can both move forward with. And then interpersonal skills are vital to forming and maintaining effective working relationships. And so for the first time in your academic career, besides maybe being in high school or your elementary years, this person is with you and they're with you for a while. You don't in 8 weeks class and you get a new person. You really have to work with being with this person. And so interpersonally, that was very important to me, that my chair and I, we established a good working relationship. And then finally, these are some of the ways that you can develop interpersonal skills. So if you see here, they're not in a particular order, but one of the ways as a student we can get caught up is when there's a difference. Maybe you see things one way, committee members see things another way, or in your perception, committee members are not seeing things the same way. That's not always true. What I've learned throughout just life in general and having long-term mature quality relationships is that you can typically find agreement just about anywhere. So when we would disagree or they would disagree, that's that learning to be tolerant of ambiguity. I would look for the agreement in the disagreement. And I learned to do that. Okay, this person said this person said that, this person said that, but where do they all agree? And then navigating that. And then when a difference is actually occurring, when you're talking to somebody in an agreeable way and you're working with them in an agreeable way and you've established that you want to move forward with them, it's easier to get through things. And then in that helped me develop my communication skills. So, and then down in the last two, there's an accountability. There's a joint accountability on both sides, and then personal integrity. So these are some of the ways that you can actually develop your interpersonal skills, and those are the ways that I got. So if you have any questions, this will be the time. I think I already addressed some ways that it changed me. I tried to kind of weave that in, but Dr. Berman, let me know if you want me to speak a little more to that.
There are other questions, so if you could stop sharing, please.
Okay.
Here's an interesting question. Someone wrote, I'm in my second course. How did you feel when you first started?
The same way that I felt with every course. Oh my goodness, this is a new course. I'm freaked out. This is new. The same way I felt when I got the dissertation. Every class, every step of the way, there was some apprehension because you've never done it before. That's something that is probably going to happen from beginning to end.
Okay. Another question. How long did it take you on this journey?
Almost 6 years.
And did you take time off?
I did. I took time off. The first time I took a break was when the lit review class came. We had that life cycle plan. I remember I used to have the life cycle plan printed out, looked at the steps where we were supposed to be. And I was like, I don't know what a lit review is. I don't even know how I'm going to write a lit review. And it freaked me out. So I took a leave of absence to go learn about lit review. So yeah, I took time off.
And how much time did you take off?
That one was 60 days, but it was valuable because I took the time off to actually learn what a lit review is. Never
Good.
done one before.
Next question. Did you use an editor to help you with your writing?
Absolutely not. I would hear of people doing that. I am not loaded. Editors cost money. And my own sense of integrity was, why pay somebody else to do something that I need to learn how to do myself? So I purchased books going back to the basics of writing and grammar. I didn't just use Grammarly for the sake of using Grammarly. When Grammarly gave me a suggestion, I would pause to be able to go back and look. I recall one time having 89 instances of passive voice in my prospectus in my chair. My first one said, you got to clean this up. Like, passive voice was like an eyesore for her, and having to do that. So that cleaning up 89 instances of passive voice helped me learn how to write an active voice as much as I could.
Okay. Here's something about specifically your research. Were your focus group participants different from the other individuals you interviewed?
No, they were the same people.
Okay. Let me go over here. Here's an interesting question. How long did the format process take you?
That was fairly quick for me because I was working on making sure that things were formatted throughout. Now, there were instances where I had to get help, like table of contents, structuring tables the right way, learning the different headers and all that other stuff, but it didn't take very long for me.
Okay, here's another question about transcription. Can you assess the quality of TEMI transcription service? Was it good? How good was it? Or
I
was
would say about 85% accurate most of the time. I learned, so here are a couple of tips with that. If you are interviewing and you're using maybe Zoom or something like that to interview, it's a good practice to mute yourself while that participant is actually talking. The double background noise can make the transcript not come out well, but it was about 85% accurate.
Another question, how long did it take you to go through IRB?
IRB, because I didn't do it right twice, was about a month. That one was on me, yeah.
Okay, here's one. In your getting discouraged along the way, how long did it take you to bounce back?
It would depend, but for the most part, about 24 to 48 hours. The way that I knew I was bouncing back is when I would go to do something with my dissertation and my feelings didn't emerge. I would come back to my logic. Me knowing that I came back to my logic is when I start asking questions about what I see. So for example, if I got a comment from my chair that made me emotional, like, I don't understand why she's telling me to do this. I thought I did it. That's emotion. But if I opened it back up and I looked at something in it, I got curious. That's an interesting word choice that she put there. I wonder why she put that there. That's how I knew I was coming back to my logic. Very good question.
Okay. I'm still looking at all the questions. I think we've answered vast many of them. One second. Okay, was there an area in your dissertation defense do you wish you would have been more prepared for?
No, I think you can prepare as much as you can. So again, that's one of those, that's the risk, you know what I mean? That's that tolerance for ambiguity. I did the best that I could. So no regrets with my defense.
Okay. Who and what did you use for encouragement as a support system?
Lots of time, my peers, my colleagues, my family. I did a lot of praying, lots and lots of praying. So yeah, those will be my support systems.
Okay. Another question about the expert panel. Did you, let me just go back for a second. I just saw that question here and it disappeared. Did you, I can't see the question now.
So I think if usually what the question that emerges with an expert panel is who do you use? And with an expert panel, you need to ensure that these people have some knowledge and expertise in your area, in your topic or area of study. These three individuals were people that could have potentially been a part of the sample, but would not have been a part of the sample. So that was that. And yes, I did do field testing. I did both of them.
Okay. And speaking about your proposal defense, how long was that?
Me actually going through the presentation was about 25 to 30 minutes. Q&A was about maybe 15 to 20 minutes.
Okay, I think that's about it. So I'd like to thank you, Dr. Johnson, for presenting and sharing with everyone your experience and how you went through the program and how you've grown as an individual, as a researcher. It's been great to have you. And I want to thank all the participants today for staying on. It's kind of late in the East Coast now, but I think it's well worth it. On behalf of Dr. Berger, Dr. Bainbridge, and myself and the entire team, I'd like to wish everyone a healthy and happy New Year, safe New Year, and that 2021 will be a much better year than 2020. So on behalf of everyone, be safe, and I look forward to graduation in real time when we can hood you, when you can physically walk across the stage rather than seeing me in an avatar on a screen.
And there's a lot of thank yous and congratulations coming to me in the chat. You all are very, very welcome. And thank you for all the congrats.
Alrighty then. Thank you all and have a wonderful evening. Bye-bye now.